Gati Visida
Kalindya Gati Visida
Ahobir Bharata Shava
Ahobir Bharata Shava
Prapadyata Svasaritam
Prapadyata Svasaritam
Yatra Mitra Suto Muni
Yatra Mitra Suto Muni Kalindya Gati Visida Ahobir Bharata Shava Prapadyata Svasaritam Yatra Mitra Suto Muni Kalindya Gati Visida Ahobir Bharata Shava Prapadyata Svasaritam Yatra Mitra Suto Muni.
Ladies.
Kalindya Gati Visida
Kalindya Gati Visida
Ahobir Bharata Shava
Ahobir Bharata Shava
Prapadyata Svasaritam
Prapadyata Svasaritam
Yatra Mitra Suto Muni
Yatra Mitra Suto Muni.
Kalindya Gati Visida
Kalindya Gati Visida
Ahobir Bharata Shava
Ahobir Bharata Shava
Prapadyata Svasaritam
Prapadyata Svasaritam
Yatra Mitra Suto Muni
Yatra Mitra Suto Muni.
Kalindya Gati Visida
Kalindya Gati Visida
Ahobir Bharata Shava
Ahobir Bharata Shava
Prapadyata Svasaritam
Prapadyata Svasaritam
Yatra Mitra Suto Muni
Yatra Mitra Suto Muni.
Kalindya on the bank of the Jamuna.
On the bank of the Yamuna.
Katibi, a few. Sidhe, being so past.
Being so fast.
Ahobihi,
Ahobi.
days. Bharata Rishabha, all best of the Bharat dynasty.
All best of the Bharat dynasty.
Prapadyata,
Prapadyata.
reached.
Swasaritam.
Swasaritam, the celestial water of the Ganges.
Celestial water of the Ganges.
Yatra, where? Mitra Sutaha, the son of Mitra.
The son of Mitra.
Muni, sage. Translation. After passing a few days on the bank of the river Jamuna, Vidura, the self-realized soul, reached the bank of the Ganges, where the great sage Maitreya was situated. Please repeat. After passing a few days on the bank of the river Jamuna, Vidura, the self-realized soul, reached the bank of the Ganges, where the great sage Maitreya was situated. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the third canto, fourth chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Vidura Approaches Maitreya. No purport. But I was very interested by the previous verse. So you've had a class on that already, have you? Who gave that class? Nrsimha Kovacha Prabhu. Nrsimha Kovacha Prabhu. Okay. Well, we'll follow in his footsteps and give another one. This is a very beautiful verse, verse 35. Atmanam cha kurushrishta Krishnena manashikshitam Jayan gate bhagavate Ru Roda Prema Vivalaha. Atmanam, himself. Cha, also. Kurukshetra, O best of the Kurus. Krishnena, by Krishna. Manasa, by the mind. Ikshitam, remembered. Jhayan, thus thinking of. Gate, having gone. Bhagavate, of the devotee. Rurodha, cries loudly. Prema Vivalaha, overwhelmed by the ecstasy of love. Translation. Understanding that he was remembered by Lord Krishna while quitting this world, Vidura began to cry loudly, overwhelmed by the ecstasy of love. Purport. Vidura was overwhelmed by the ecstasy of love when he understood that Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, thought of him at the last moment. Although he thought of himself as insignificant, he was remembered by the Lord, by the Lord's causeless mercy. Vidura accepted this as a great favor, and thus he cried. This crying is the last word in the progressive path of devotional service. One who can cry for the Lord in love is certainly successful in the line of devotional service. Umaganati mirandasya gananjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam jena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swa Padantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Brishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanshakaupa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindho Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. You want to sit down? Do you want to sit?
Yeah, actually, but we are looking to light the diya.
Sorry?
We are trying to light the diya.
Leah, I don't, you ask the pujari. Yeah, they'll. Okay. This is a very beautiful verse, very quintessential verse. As Prabhupada says, this crying is the last word in the progressive path of devotional service. One who can cry for the Lord in love is certainly successful in the line of devotional service. There is one verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Lord Chaitanya, while he's living in Puri, every night he used to spend his nights in the Gambhira room, and Ramananda Roy and Swarup Damodar used to quote verses from the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, especially verses relating to the feelings of separation from Krishna expressed by the gopis. And it is explained that Lord Chaitanya would sit and cry and hear these recitations and cry. And Srila Prabhupada begins a lecture on that verse by saying, so this is our process. You come, you sit on the floor, you hear of Krishna, and you cry. This is our process. In mundane relationships, we see that too. People cry, especially they cry when loving relationships break up. You know. I cried a river over you. Cry me a river. And my tears became like a river. So this idea of crying for love is pervertedly reflected in the material world also. But here, the important word about love that is used here is ecstasy of love. There's a lot of important words here today. We might not get around to all of them. But the difficulty we are hobbled with in the material world is that our actual original love for Krishna has been covered by lust. There's a very nice series of verses in the end of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna describes the nature of lust. Arjuna asks him the question, what is it that causes a person to act sinfully, even against his will? And Krishna then gives the final verses of this chapter, where he says, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion, later transformed into wrath, and which is the all devouring, sinful enemy of this world. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharats, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Heavy stuff. Heavy stuff. Therefore, we must enter into ecstasy. Ecstasy is an interesting word. It can be very badly misused. Literally, it means out of static. Out of the static. It comes from the Greek, stasi. Static. Static. Out of the static. Actually, this situation of being situated, this condition of being situated within the three modes of material nature, and particularly, as it says here, affected by the mode of passion, and therefore overwhelmed with lust, is the same old thing over and over and over again. It is called chewing the chewed. And the highest manifestation of lust is sex life. And the whole material world runs on sex life. And on the basis of that sex life, sexual attraction, Bhagavatam explains that there is a hridaya granthi. Hridaya granthis. What a word. Hridaya granthis. A hard knot in the heart. A hard knot of attachment is tied in the heart when one engages in material sex life. And as a result of that, Bhagavatam explains, therefore, one becomes completely overwhelmed by the bodily conception, the material bodily conception, which is called a misconception in the Bhagavatam. This is a misconception. It's a conception, but it's a misconception. And one becomes completely overwhelmed by this bodily conception of the self when one becomes engaged in sex life. And everyone in the material world is engaged in sex life. This body is a product of sex life. And by having a sex life, other bodies will be produced. Now, this is a very powerful and binding process for the living entity. It is a bewildering process. As the true knowledge of the real knowledge of the living entity, and bewilders him. Bewilders him. That's a powerful word. Bewildering. Bewildered. Just not aware of where you actually are, or what you're actually doing, or why you're there. That is bewilderment. And as I said, this is going on in every species of life. Sex life. Male, female. Male, female. Sometimes you're the male, sometimes you're the female, depending on where your lusty desires are taking you. But it all passes off as love. But actually, everybody deep down inside their heart knows this is not love. This is not love. Sex is basically a mechanical activity. You can practically have sex with anyone, especially in the human form of life. In animal life, it's not so easy. It's very, very strictly controlled by, as they say, by nature. But whose nature? It's controlled by Krishna. Maya jakshina prakriti suyate sacharacharam hetunanenu kuntaya jagat viparivartate. Animals, they go into heat. They go into mating season. And they don't mate with animals from another species. They mate with animals in their own species. But there are 400,000 species of human beings, and any one from any species can have sex with another. That's the reality of the material world, of the human form of life. But every time that activity happens in every human lifetime, that knot in the hard knot, which ties matter and spirit together by the agency of the false ego, gets tied tighter and tighter, and add another tie, another one. So there's this huge knot in the heart of every conditioned soul. And it's covering, it's covering what is deepest in the heart, and that is one's love for Krishna. We've quoted the verse many times, but it always bears up. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema. Nitya Siddha means eternally established. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema. That is, love of Krishna is eternally established within the heart of every living entity. But we are in the static situation, the tied up, the bound up situation of lust. And as Bhagavatam says, it is chewing the chewed. There is what we are looking for is not to be found in chewing the chewed. We've chewed it, and whatever was there, whatever taste was there, it's gone. It's gone. But there's a certain madness that comes over us under the influence of the modes of material nature. We think that there's something here in this material world. We think that there's something, that we have a vague recollection of something, some fleeting idea, that there's something here that will make us eternally happy, will make us happy and satisfied. But it's all an illusion, and we're caught in just the repetition of the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. I think everybody's aware of the little saying of Einstein, that doing the same thing over and over and over again and thinking you're going to get a different result is a sign of insanity. But we are bewildered. We're bewildered. Maya casts a spell. And Krishna says there is no Maya. There is no Maya as powerful as my Maya in the form of a woman. Don't mind, ladies. Don't take it personally. Because we're working on the platform that we are not these bodies. So, but as I said, sometimes it's the man, sometimes it's the woman. Both male and female in the material world are actually manifestations of Prakriti. Prakriti is feminine. We are all by nature feminine on the spiritual platform. In the material world, these designations are temporary and they are based upon illusion. And Krishna says there is no greater illusion actually in this world than sex. And Prabhupada explains over and over. A man will work day and night just in order to have some sex life. To have a facility for sex life. Money, women, they go together. But it's a very dangerous situation that one puts oneself in all kinds of ways. All kinds of ways. One is in a very dangerous situation when he gets involved in sex life, or when one gets involved in material sex life. It's a very, very difficult situation. And we have to transcend it. We have to transcend it by experience ecstasy, experiencing something other than this. There's a very powerful verse in the second chapter. There's a series of verses, a very powerful series of verses, beginning from when Arjuna asks Krishna, how can you tell when somebody is in transcendental consciousness? Prabhupada makes it very, very simple in the answer. He says, you can tell by what a person talks about. And a person who is actually in transcendental consciousness has given up all varieties of desire for sense gratification which arise from mental concoction. And then he goes on to explain that though the embodied living being may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects still remains. Where is it? Where does he say in the 3rd chapter? It's in the senses. It's in the mind. It's in the intelligence. My God, the whole thing's been overtaken here. The enemy is within. The enemy is within. Taken over your senses, taken over your mind, taken over your intelligence. Thinking, feeling, and willing. All in relationship, actually, to sex life. Sex life in heaven, sex life in hell. Sex life anywhere. There's a very nice story about a crippled man. Prabhupada tells a story about a crippled man who was very, very attentively looked after by his wife. And he became attached to a very high-class prostitute in the city that he lived in. And he developed a very deep attachment to her. So he actually confessed his desire to his wife. And so she was bewildered what to do. So she went and she saw the prostitute. She said, my husband's become very attached to you, but he's a cripple and there's nothing he can do about it. So the prostitute said, well, you bring him to me. So the arrangement was made that this crippled man would be brought to see the prostitute. And she arranged a very beautiful meal, all laid out on a table for him, and beautiful. And she served him. And she had a golden bowls. So she served him with a spoon from a golden bowl. And he was eating and eating, and he was just totally enchanted by this woman. And then she said, would you like some more? And he said, oh, yes, more. So she then picked up a clay bowl with the same preparation in it and started feeding him that. And he was enjoying it and looking at her. And she says, so now tell me, did you prefer what I served you from the golden pot or from the clay pot? He said, well, they're both the same. She said, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Go home. So this is the situation in the material world. And it's static. Wherever you go, whatever species, whatever planet, whatever anything, it's all the same. And there's no satisfaction. There's no happiness. Because this is a situation that is dukkhalayam, ashashvatam. It's a temporary place, and it's full of miseries. So, although the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. This higher taste is becoming overwhelmed by ecstatic love. By coming out of the static situation of lust and experiencing real love. Real love means your relationship with Krishna. And there's a very important point being made here. Although he thought of himself as insignificant, he was remembered by the Lord, by his causeless mercy, by the Lord's causeless mercy. Insignificance, a very important word. In England, they have a book called Where's Wally? This series of books. And actually, devotees did a similar book called Where's Hanuman? And they'll have a picture of a scene, and there'll be hundreds. No drawing in the picture is bigger than that. And you'll open it up, and it's always 2 pages. And it's just some kind of city scene or whatever kind of scene they have, but there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people there. And the game is, where's Hanuman? Where's Wally? You've got to find this person. And you look 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 and you look. You drive it off into sections and you look, not in, it drives you mad. And actually, they make jigsaw puzzles out of it. So, this is insignificant. We're just another brick in the wall, as they say, another face in the crowd. We're all insignificant in that sense. You can't imagine how many living entities there are. I think I've said this before. I read an article about bacteria in your mouth. And they say that within your mouth, on the palate, on your tongue, under your tongue, between your cheek and your gums, all around, all over your mouth, it's estimated that there are over 300 trillion bacteria at any given time. At any given time. And we understand every single one of those bacteria is the body currently occupied by a soul, none different than me. And it expands out, what to speak of what's in your mouth, just all through your body. There's a universe right here. And that's expanded out over countless universes. So we get a little bit of an idea then of what insignificant means. You think, here am I looking in there, where am I? Well, I don't know where I am. I don't know. But the point about this is that that's just from our angle of vision. From Krishna's angle of vision, he's totally aware of every single jiva. Vedaham samatitani vartamanani chajuna bhavishyani chabhutani mam tu vedana kaschana. I know everything that has happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and everything that is yet to come. I know every living entity. But me, no one knows. This is the result of bewilderment. Tribir gunamai bhavair abhisavamidang jagat mohitam nabijanati mamebhya paramavyaya. Deluded, bewildered by the 3 modes of material nature, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. So Krishna knows everyone. And the actual significant point about all of this is that Krishna loves everyone. He loves everyone. And actually, he's thinking of everyone at every moment. How can anybody do that? Well, this is where we begin to have to get a little glimpse of the inconceivability of Krishna. Krishna is totally aware of everything. And as I say many times, that's actually a meaningless statement. Not that Krishna is aware is meaningless, but to say Krishna is aware of everything is meaningless, because there is no end to creation. We can say, everything in this glass. I'll drink everything in this glass. And we understand it's something contained, and I can drink it, and it's finished. It's all gone. But there's no point when you can say, well, that's the last living entity. That's it, all accounted for. No, there's no end to it. There is no end. There is no end. Just as there is no beginning, there is no end. These things are incomprehensible to us because we are conditioned by the modes of material nature to think in terms of beginning, middle, and end. Just like they say with a movie. The best movie has a good beginning, a good middle, and a good end. But then, somebody says, well, what was happening? What's the backstory? And then what happened after that? And then you see, like with a thing like Star Wars, started out, one Star Wars movie appeared in the 80s, and then there were two, then there were three. Trilogy of movies. But then you had another trilogy of movies of the backstory before the first one. And then you had three more up, and I don't know how many have been made now. But the idea is, actually, there is no beginning and there is no end. Beginning and end is an illusion because we're addicted to sex life. And we think, oh, I've been born. And therefore I will die. And in between time, let me have as good a time as I can. But it's all an illusion. The reality is there is no end. So there is no limit to the numbers of living entities, but they are all within Krishna's consciousness. Not just in a vague sense, oh, there was somebody somewhere, oh, where are they now? Krishna knows. Krishna knows us. He knows everything about us. He knows more about us than we could ever know ourselves. And he never forgets. He never forgets. That's the whole point about Arjuna's question in the 4th chapter of the Gita, where Krishna outlines the parampara. And he says, I instructed this to the sun god, and the sun god instructed it to... And Arjuna says, hang on. The sun god is older than you by birth. And Krishna says, yes, many, many births both you and I have taken. I can remember all of them. You cannot. This is our situation. Krishna is our eternal companion. He has manifested himself. He has expanded himself as Super Soul and acted lovely. Devanruta Swami here last year gave a class where he talked about Super Soul, and he described the Super Soul as your chaperone. Very nice idea, your chaperone. I mean, most people, we're living in a world where there's more and more and more and more surveillance. And in the material world, you're always surveilling in order to control and manipulate a situation and limit people's freedom. And when we come to the understanding of the presence of Super Soul, our natural reaction immediately is paranoia. You mean I'm being watched at every moment? Oh my goodness. But actually it's quite different from that. Krishna is our chaperone, and he's neutral, and he doesn't interfere with our exercise of our free will, and he doesn't stop anything from happening as a result of our desires. But the problem is, in the material world, we've entered into a game of penalties. Rewards and penalties. Rewards and penalties. And we've become so conditioned by this that we think this is all in all. That I just play the game. I just play the game and I'll get what I want. But we've forgotten that it's all temporary and it's all misery. Because that little switch has been flicked from love to lust, love to lust. And we think there's something here, there's something I'm missing, something if I just go there, maybe I'll find it there. If I just, and on it goes. And Krishna's there, okay? You want to go to hell? This is how you do it. You want to go to heaven? This is how you do it. And as a result of that, we're going around and around and around and around the wheel of samsara. Repeated birth and death in the material world. Sometimes meeting with good things, and sometimes meeting with evil things. But actually, Srila Prabhupada explains very clearly, it's all evil. Krishna says it. Janma, mrityu, jara, vyadi, dukkha, doshano, dashanam. You see the evil nature. This is a symptom of knowledge. You see, this is evil. This is no good for me. This repetition of birth, death, disease, and old age. And as the saying goes, God knows where. God only knows. God knows where we all are. Who we all are. And He's not punishing us here. We're punishing ourselves. We put ourselves under the wheel. We don't have to be here. But once we're here, where are we? Where are we? Whereabouts unknown. We don't know where we are. We don't know why we're here. We don't know where we're going. Now that's pretty weird, isn't it? Say you go home on the train, right? You go down to North Sydney, you get on the train, and sometimes it's pretty full, so you have to sit next to somebody you don't know, and you say to that person, "Where are you coming from?" And they say, "I don't know." Well, where are you going? I don't know. Well, you're starting to think, this is a strange person. And then you say, well, what are you doing here? I don't know. If it's a don't know to the answer to those three questions, any on-the-ball kind of person thinks, well, this is pretty strange. And that kind of nonsense expands into all kinds of philosophies. Because everybody's got a philosophy. It's all one. It's all one. All paths lead to the same goal. So if I want to go to Brisbane, I buy a ticket to Melbourne. It's nonsense. And we're lost in this nonsense, this bewildered situation. Totally insignificant, trying to hold up, here I am, here's me, here's my act. It's all nonsense. The whole situation is nonsensical. And we are just another face in the crowd. But Krishna is aware of every face in every crowd. And He doesn't want us to be here. He didn't want us to come here in the first place. So it's a fear. Understanding that He was remembered by Lord Krishna while quitting this world, Vidura began to cry loudly, overwhelmed by the ecstasy of love. We need to remember that Krishna is remembering us at every moment. And actually, as soon as we take to devotional service, we become aware of Krishna. We become aware of Krishna's love. Don't think that, love for Krishna is, that's... No, love for Krishna is here and now. And it has been reawakened by contact with devotional service, by contact with the pure devotees of the Lord, by contact with the holy name of the Lord, by contact with prasadam, by contact with seeing the Lord's beautiful form. Because Krishna is all attractive. Krishna is all attractive. Everyone actually is attracted to Krishna all the time. It's just when we become bewildered by the material energy, we're attracted to his external energy. We're attracted to the external features of the Lord. And actually they're very beautiful. There's a lot of beauty in the material world. Prabhupada uses that phrase at one point. He says, this beautiful material world. Beautiful, beautiful things. And endlessly beautiful. The principle of infinite variegatedness applies to everything. Even within the finite material world. Now here's another example of inconceivability. Within the please don't chant japa in class. Please don't do this. Chant japa when you chant japa, hear Bhagavatam when you hear Bhagavatam. You don't conflate the two things together. That's another illusion. I'll chant my japa in Bhagavatam class. Go chant your japa. If you want to chant your japa, you go chant your japa. In Bhagavatam class, you give full attention to what is being said. Endless mutability, infinite mutability within a finite situation. That's inconceivable. But that's the reality. That's the reality. There is infinite variegatedness within the material world, and we can become captivated by it forever. One time in a darshan in Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada said there are some jivas who stay in the material world forever because they want to. They're captivated by it and they never become fed up with it. It's endlessly fascinating to them. And if that's what you want, that's what Krishna will give you. Whatever you want, Krishna will give it to you. And what helps to actually reawaken what is needed to reawaken what you really want, because what everybody really wants is Krishna. To be with Krishna. To be in love with Krishna. Everybody wants this, but they've forgotten Krishna. Just clean forgot him. Gone. Poof. Just like that. Krishna's gone from our memory. Why? Because we wanted that. Now, some people argue, well, that's not possible. How, if you were with Krishna and you were in this, what you say was happening, that you were in love with Krishna, and that, well, you'd be a fool to give that up. Well, yeah, there's the beginning. To accept, I'm a fool. Until we can actually understand that I made a foolish mistake. I broke up with Krishna. Krishna never broke up with me. This will eventually touch the core of your heart. And it doesn't have to touch the core of your heart down the road in time. It can touch the core of your heart now, if you want it to. It's all based on what you want. You want your heart to open, you want Krishna to manifest, then Krishna will reciprocate. If you really want it. So our process is a process of clarifying our desires, understanding what desires are valuable and what desires are useless, what desires are called Bhadra and what are called Abhadra. Bhadra means auspicious, valuable. And there's a very powerful verse in the second chapter of the first canto that says, Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyantasto hyabhadrani vidunoti suritsatam. Everything inauspicious within the heart, abhadra, suritsatam, everything that is there in the core of the heart, the very core of our consciousness has been covered with these dirty things, these dirty desires, dirty things, contaminated consciousness. But Shrinvatam Swa Kata Krishna, by hearing Krishna Kata, by hearing the truth, by hearing about Krishna, then the word vidunoti is used. It means those dirty things become cleansed away by the chanting of these things, the hearing and chanting of these things. How? Surit, by Krishna, who is Surit, who's there within your heart. And he sees, this is what this one wants. I'll give it. But you can't fudge it. You can't fool Krishna. And the whole process of seduction in the material world is actually about trickery, about fooling. So you can't seduce Krishna. You can't seduce Krishna. Krishna knows every trick in the book. Krishna's the ultimate heartbreaker. So don't think you're going to get around him. You can't be insincere. One simply has to be sincere. I want this. And you put that in the center of your life. This is what I want. Well, wait a minute, there's all this other stuff here. There's all these other desires still harassing me. Yeah, well, that's to be understood. Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects still remains. The knot in the heart is very big and very strong and multi-layered. But it becomes slashed with the weapon of knowledge. Real knowledge. There's a story about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was rampaging all through from Macedonia. Macedonia is like, where's Macedonia? It's this tiny little place sitting now on what they call top of Greece. He overtook the whole of Greece, and he came to cross the Bosphorus to go into Turkey, and then down he came into Persia, what is now called Iran, Iraq, or the whole Middle East. He took it all over, and then he actually got to India. But when he was crossing the Bosphorus from Europe into Asia, they call it Asia Minor, but that's what's considered. When you cross over the Bosphorus, you go from Europe to Asia. And there was a knot that had been tied there. It was called the Gordian knot. And it was prophesied that anyone who could unravel that knot would conquer everything beyond. And so many people had tried to do it, and they'd never been able to do it. They could never unravel this knot. But Alexander came along, took out his sword, and just chopped the whole thing, and it fell apart. And this illusion that we are now in is just like that. Armed with the weapon of knowledge, you can just cut it. Anyone can do it. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. It doesn't matter what your mundane situation is. You don't have to be anything in the eyes of the world, and better you're not, actually. Better you're not, because if you're something in the eyes of the world, then you think you're something in the eyes of the world. But that's all an illusion. The reality is you're an eternal lover of the Lord. But you've forgotten all these things. We've forgotten. And memory is revived a bit. Memory, forgetfulness, as I said before here, you cannot remember something or forget it if you don't know it. We all know Krishna. Just as Krishna knows us, we know him. But the difference between us and Krishna is that we've forgotten him. He has never forgotten us. And you need that experience. You need to ask for that experience. You don't have to make a show of it in front of anyone. This is about your relationship with Krishna. This is personal. Up close and personal. So you ask Krishna. You ask Krishna. Do you remember me? Little insignificant me? Down here in this vast ocean of material nothing? Do you remember me? Krishna will make it very clear to you that he remembers you. And you will cry. You will cry in ecstatic love. That the ecstatic love that is dormant within your heart will be touched and reawakened. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. That doesn't mean that then, now I show up at the temple. Wow, Krishna loves me. I'm special. I'm a lover of Krishna. I should have special status. You have to be very careful of that, because the taste for sense objects still remains, and these feelings, what's that song? Those funny, familiar, forgotten feelings start walking all over your heart, and you can't deny it. And you don't want to deny it, but then you don't make a show of it, and you don't make a reputation for yourself out of it. You don't make a living out of it. But it's already happening. It's already happening. That's why you're here. That's why we're all here. Because our love for Krishna has been reawakened. Then all the do's and the don'ts of devotional service, they're not there for us to beat other people over the head with, exert control and influence over people. They're there to keep us on the straight and narrow. It's not even straight. It's a very narrow path out of this world. And the only way, Prabhupada explains, the only way you're going to get out of this world, out of this situation of entanglement, is to follow in the footsteps of the great acharyas. Follow in the footsteps of those who have gone before us. The path is there. But it's not any old path. It's a very specific path. As I was saying to someone the other day, there was a book by a man called M. Scott Peck